So, I hear you want to start a fight. Well, in today's video, we are going to cover the rules of combat in Federation and Empire, the rules we are using in the Star Trek New Worlds campaign. My name's Tony, and this is Star Trek New Worlds, a 4X turn-based strategy game and campaign based on the Federation and Empire rule set as published by the Amarillo Design Bureau. Today, we will be covering the rules of combat and helping you be successful in your big battles in FNE. Before we dive in, the FNE rules are a detailed and robust reference where there are many nuances and special circumstances that can be taken advantage by any player and special faction. Today we will be covering the basic rules around combat, the 8 steps of any engagement, and the important things you need to know before you start getting friendly with your neighbors. With that said, let's raise shields, red alert, and it is time to engage. Before we start into the 8 steps of combat, it's important to understand when combat occurs. Combat occurs during the combat phase of a player's turn. Combat is the 5th and most complicated phase of the 11 phases in each player's turn. For more on the phases in a turn, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss that video coming out soon. Combat occurs in battle hexes, or any hex where there are units from opposing sides. In a 4X FFA style game like this one, that essentially means when another player's units are in your hex, it's time to fight. Combat resolves once one or all factions retreat or when all units on the opposing side are eliminated. Each battle hex resolves completely before another can be resolved. This means if you have more than one engagement, they are resolved one at a time, in sequence. The attacking player decides in which order battles are resolved. If there's more than one faction in a hex, then each fleet must form a battle force or battle line against the other faction. That means that if there are 3 factions in a battle hex, any one player needs to form 2 separate battle forces or battle lines against each enemy faction. Combat is resolved simultaneously against each enemy. So we won't spend any time on this today, but we will revisit it if it occurs during the campaign. Step 1. Withdraw before combat. Despite the fact your dance partner wants to tango, you may not. It could be bad timing, a Kobayashi Maru scenario, or maybe you want to save those ships for an attack on your turn. Either way, you may want to avoid a fight and choose to withdraw before combat. In order to do this, the defending player states that they are withdrawing from combat. You can't do this if you reacted into the hex in response to the attacking player. For more on reaction movement, check out the rules in the playlist below. The attacking player has the option to oppose your withdrawal. If they do, the defending player can withdraw up to half, rounding down, the ships in the hex, or as many as possible, as long as the number remaining is equal to the number of ships from the attacker. Any ships that withdraw need to go to the same hex as retreating ships, and we'll cover that in step 7. A base in the hex does not affect withdrawal before combat. Ships withdrawing from the hex are not in the battle hex and do not count when calculating the size of the battle force. Step 2. Bases. If there is no base in the hex, then we skip to step 3. Planets, FRDs, tugs, or convoys acting as supply points, or transports with EPs are treated like bases. If there are multiple bases, then one is considered next to the planet, and others only can contribute half of their combat strength, or EW, to the fight. Bases don't count towards command limits, though they can act as command ships. PDUs, or planetary defense units, like a YPGB, or Y-era planetary ground base, can use combat strength if the base being attacked is next to the planet. PDUs can be given up as damage if the focus of the attack is that base. Approach battles. If I'm at a base, I can see you coming, and if I have ships, I can send them out to meet you before you arrive. This is called an approach battle. Every attacking player attacking a base must offer an approach battle on the first round of combat. The defender can accept or decline the approach battle. If the defender declines, then no approach battle occurs and the attacker must attack the base or retreat. If they retreat, they can be pursued. We'll get into that at the end of this video. Tugs setting up a base must be in the battle force of a base attack. Otherwise, they abandon the base and lose all EP spent to build it. Same for upgrades. If you're upgrading a YBS, a Y-era base station, to a YDK by example, and you abandon it, then you would lose the upgrade and all the EP spent. Tugs count towards command points. Step 3, battle force determination. Each player places their counters on the battle board. Each player selects a flagship. As mentioned a second ago, a base can be a flagship. The flagship must be one of the top 3 command rated ships, not including crippled units. A command rating is the number of ships the command ship can control. This does not include the ship itself. So, a USS Enterprise or cruiser has a command rating of 8. It can control 8 ships plus itself, resulting in a battle force of 9 total ships. Bases, convoys, PDUs, and FRDs required in the battle force don't count against the command rating. If more than one battle round is fought, which is often the case, then the battle force resets at the start of each round. Minimum force. A battle force must have at least half the ships in the hex, rounding up. Command rating dependent flagship candidates, or the top 3 command rated ships, are exempt from this. Battle intensity rating, or BIR. Do you want to fight aggressively or defensively? Well, this is where BIR comes in. In each battle round, you pick your battle intensity rating from 1 to 4. The defender does this, and then the attacker does. Take these two numbers and add them together. So the attacker plus the defender equals the total battle intensity rating. But wait, there's more. A 1d6 is then rolled to determine the variable battle intensity rating. There's a table at 304.3 in the rules, and if you take a look at that, you can add or subtract as much as 2 to the BIR. So if the defender picks a battle intensity rating of 4 and the attacker picks a battle intensity rating of 4, and a 1d6 is rolled with the variable BIR and it's at the maximum of 2, 4 plus 2 equals 10. Hold on to that number. We're going to use that number in a second. Now, if one player has only units that cannot retreat, then the other player gets to pick BIR for both sides. Step number 4, damage. Add up all the attack factors of all the units in the battle force for the attacker and the defender. Using the table in 304.2 in the rules, for the BIR, multiply the total attack factors by the BIR percentage. This is determined by using the BIR number from adding the attacker's and defender's BIR and the variable BIR in our example, the 4 plus 2. That equals 10.
Fascinating.
If a 6 was rolled on that 1d6, then we know that the BIR is 10, and a BIR 10 on the table equals 50%. If the total attack factors for any one side was 10 by example, then 50% of that would be 5 damage total. Step number 5, directed damage. You may want to single out a specific target or high value unit. This HVU may be a base, a command ship, scout, or any other unit in the battle force that you want to direct damage onto. You can select any ship in the opponent's battle force that you can effectively cripple or destroy using directed damage. Directed damage is resolved at a 2-to-1 ratio by default, meaning that you need to generate 2 points of damage to inflict 1 on the enemy. For ships in a formation bonus or certain special positions, this increases to a 3-to-1 ratio. Therefore, with 5 points of damage generated in our example, if the target has a defense factor of 2.5 or less, we can direct damage onto it, crippling it. Step 6, resolving damage. Directed damage is resolved first. The defender resolves damage, then the attacker. Damage is resolved by subtracting the defense factors of a unit from the total damage generated. If this is on an uncrippled unit, then the counter is flipped to the crippled status. If crippled, then the unit is destroyed. Remaining damage smaller than 0.5 or half a point is ignored. If greater than half a point, then the player must cripple or destroy the unit. If using the plus-minus point rule, which we do, then any remaining points are applied in the next battle round only. If a player, by example, generates 4 points of damage, but there are no ships with a defense factor of 4 or below, then no ships are crippled, and 4 points is carried over to the next battle round. Step 7. Retreat. After resolving the damage, you may decide it may be better to fight another day. The defending player has the option then to retreat. The defender has an option to retreat, the attacker has an option to retreat, and then after the attacker has decided, the defender gets one more chance. If either player retreats, then the battle hex is resolved. If one or both players retreat, the defender resolves his retreat first. There is a list of various hexes that a retreating player can retreat into. Take a look in the rules around the retreat priorities to properly understand the nuance of where and when you can retreat into a specific hex. For the purposes of Star Trek New Worlds, the priorities are as follows in order. A player can retreat into any neutral hex. A player cannot retreat into a hex with more enemy ships than the number of retreating ships. Player must retreat into a hex that is in supply. If no hexes are in supply, then disregard. You cannot pick a hex out of supply if there is a hex in supply available. When picking a supplied hex, main supply grids are picked over partial supply grids, and more on that in a future video. You need to pick a hex with the shortest path to a supply point, for example, a base, a tug, or a planet. Any hex abandoned during previous combat cannot be considered in supply. The force must retreat together, so no splitting up of forces. You cannot select a hex containing enemy units unless there are no other hexes available. When you retreat into a hex with enemy units, but no friendly units, it creates a new battle hex. If a player wants to conduct a fighting retreat, then the player may ignore everything I just said and retreat into any hex that they want. However, they will fight one battle round at Burr 0 and the attacker will be at Burr 10. The blocking force can conduct a pursuit battle with the exact same rating. If a force retreats into an unresolved battle hex, all friendly forces fight one battle at Burr 0 and the opposing force at Burr 10. Then all friendly forces retreat. It is quite complicated, and I encourage you to look at the rules for yourself to fully understand all the nuances around retreating. Step number 8, pursuit. If you are chasing down a retreating enemy, this is the last phase of your combat. Otherwise, combat resolves at the end of retreating. The non-retreating player picks up to, and no more, than 6 ships, command rating dependent, to chase down the enemy. These can include any ships from the hex and not just from the battle force. A 1d6 is rolled. If the result is less or equal to the number of ships pursuing, the final round is fought. If greater, then there is no pursuit battle. The retreating player must form his battle force with all the crippled units he or she is retreating with. Then add up to 3 non-crippled ships. If this exceeds the command rating of the flagship, then anything above the command rating is not included in calculating the defender's combat potential, but all ships can be damaged. If the battle force does not exceed the command rating, then additional uncrippled ships can be added up to the command rating. A final round of combat is fought normally. The pursuing player may designate 1 or more crippled ships for directed damage. Only crippled ships can be targeted in this way. After this final combat round, the retreat proceeds. Electronic warfare. Scouts and electronic warfare are a special part of combat, so much so that we are going to address it quickly here in this video. Any ship or base or unit that has a black diamond on the counter has special sensors that generate electronic warfare capabilities. If one battle force has 1 or more units like this, then they can use electronic warfare. Each EW capable unit has an electronic warfare factor listed on the Master Ship Information Table, or MSIT. This is the shopping list that players use to pick their ships when buying them. With a YBS, the most common EW unit in the early game, the EW rating is 2, with a 2 attack factor, or 1 with a 4 attack factor. What this means is that there is a high and low power setting for EW. Using the high power rating negatively impacts its offensive firepower, hence the 2 attack. A YDK, by contrast, or a Y-era space dock, has 4 different power levels by comparison. When calculating EW, add up all the EW factors added to the combat round for the attacker and the defender. Subtract the smaller number from the bigger number, and this gives you the net EW point total, or NEWT. The P is silent. A terrible name for a number that is referenced in a table in Rule 313.2, so 313.2. Basically, if there is a 0 to 1 point difference between the attacker and defender, there is no change. If the defender has 2 to 4 points, there is a -1 die shift to the 1d6 roll for Burr. Or if there's 5 and over, it's a -2 die shift. In our previous example about Burr, with the Burr 10, with a 1d6 rolled and the 6 is rolled on the 1d6, giving us that 50% applied to damage, a -2 die shift would take it down to 40%. That translates to 4 damage inflicted versus the original 5. As the numbers grow, or your fleets get bigger, this difference starts to have a significant impact on the damage you can inflict. If the roll on the 1d6 had been a 1, then the -2 die shift would lower the Burr from a Burr 10 using 1 to a Burr 8 using 1, or 30% damage versus 35 of the 1d6 1 at Burr 10. To keep it simple, if one side has a scout and the other side does not, then the die shift is an automatic -1. If both sides have EW units, then calculate the NEWT and go from there. Okay, so that's combat in a nutshell in Federation and Empire. Hopefully that helps you in figuring out how your fleet battles will be conducted. Make sure that you follow this playlist, this channel, to find out more about F&E rules as it comes to Star Trek New Worlds and the campaign that we're playing. I'll see you soon in the next episode. Bye for now.